First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. I think it's great. And first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the varied Aboriginal lands we are gathered on and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Islanders that are gathered with us this morning in this special Reconciliation Day week event. We also appreciate it's a difficult time for many people in our community, and we hope this snap lockdown is effective and the current COVID restrictions can be quickly lifted. I'd also like to say this was going to be our first in-person, face-to-face ECCV member forum since the start of the pandemic. So it was disappointing we had to revert to this online event. And sometimes we have some issues in relation to digital technology, which we don't have with face-to-face, but those are the issues we have to deal with. We're particularly looking forward to this event being hosted at VACCEL, where that's the Aboriginal community organisation that provides advice to government, for those that don't know, and where ECCV board and staff members last week attended a half-day Aboriginal awareness training session, which I might say was wonderful. It was everybody walked away very impressed and very much aware of Indigenous issues and the challenges we have. But nevertheless, we're delighted to have been able to carry on and thank our guest representatives. Today we'll have the Honourable Sheena Watt, MP, Uncle Shane Charles, Diana David from Reconciliation Victoria for their flexibility in accommodating the changed circumstances. So that's much appreciated. The theme of this year's National Reconciliation Week is more than a word. Reconciliation takes action. It is an important context for all of us who are committed to social justice, addressing systematic discrimination, inequality and disadvantage. Takes real action, and this remains true in supporting a First Nations Australia to collectively address the continuing negative aspects of colonialism, which we can see. ECCV has a proud history of working to support self-determination for First Nations people. Lorna Lipman, the wife of the ECCV founding chair, Walter Lipman, who we celebrate that event each year with the Walter Lippmann oration. She was a champion for social justice in her own right, with a deep commitment to Indigenous issues. This included Mrs. Lippmann serving as Vice President of the Victorian Aboriginal Advancement League, working as a research fellow at Monash University's Centre for Research into Aboriginal Affairs, and as an advisor to the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, Minister Gordon Bryant, who I knew personally. ECCV has also worked in partnership with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, most recently the Aboriginal Controlled Community Health Organisation, as part of a 5-year consortium of Victorian peak bodies in the State Trustees Ageing, Disability, Mental Health and Collaborative Panel. And I also, in my role as chair, in my past role as chair of the Drugs Task Force, we also worked with VACCEL and working with the Australian Drug Foundation during joint projects some years ago. So we've had that long history. We are in the early stage of developing our reconciliation plan, for which the ECCV board has set up a strategic action as part of our 2025 strategic plan. This follows the launching of a reconciliation action plan by our national peak body, FECA, in 2019. Today's member forum is an initial step in the ECCV and its membership playing a more active role in the reconciliation movement and serving as allies in continuing quest by Aboriginal and Torres Islanders for social justice and fighting for those historical wrongs to be righted. We are generally honoured for us to have with us today Sheena Watt MP, member for Northern Metropolitan Region, Uncle Sam Charles, co-chair of Reconciliation Victoria, Diana David, their CEO, with us today. We're looking forward to today's opportunity to listen to them and learn from them as we commence our organisational journey to develop our RAP, our reconciliation plan. At this time, I'd like to invite Sheena to give today's keynote address. Sheena?
Welcome. Oh, thank you. Thank you very, very much. I begin by, of course, thanking you, Eddie, for the invitation to come and present today to the Ethnic Community Council of Victoria's members meeting. I too have many fond memories of members meetings in my community, Peak, Bacho, which you spoke about there just a moment ago. And of course, this is an event to honour Reconciliation Week. Can I begin, as is my custom and protocol, by acknowledging and paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. For me, I come to you today from Wurundjeri country, here in the northern suburbs, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to the ancestors for their continued guidance of us, and also pay my respects to all First Nations people that are on the line today or on the Zoom, and extend that acknowledgement to the elders, ancestors and knowledge keepers of your communities. I know that we wouldn't be here together as fighters for our community if not for having some elders and some ancestors that continue to guide us on our path. So my thanks to Chris for the invitation today. I know, like Eddie said, that we'd all like to be here together, and the news of the latest extension to the circuit breaker is not easy to hear. But we also know that this is a particularly vicious virus, and we just can't have it getting any more into our communities, because we know from last year just what an impact that has, particularly in multicultural and First Nations communities. I heard somebody say to me that we don't have books that celebrate our great achievements. We have our elders that are our libraries. They hold and contain the knowledge of our our story, our struggle and our fight. And if COVID was to come through and take our libraries, what a great tragedy that would be. So I just do want to acknowledge the strength and dignity of Aboriginal community controlled health organisations for what they've done to make sure that the number of COVID cases in my community has remained remarkably low. I've known, but there's some familiar looking faces, can I just say, and some familiar names here. So it's really lovely to be back again with the Ethnic Community Councils of Victoria. I have what might not have been shared in my introduction is that I did do a stint of service for the Federation of Ethnic Community Councils Australia, moved to Canberra, left Melbourne at the time when our multicultural communities were under some really severe attacks, and I felt it was my role and my place to step up against that. And they were the times of burqa bans and terror raids and data accessing people's data based on their multicultural background or their affiliations to their country. It was a really tough time, and I learned an awful lot about the strength and resilience of ethnic community councils right across our country, and no more so did I learn about that than in my own state and the leadership of ECCV in that greater work, but also in caring for and stepping up for our most vulnerable in our community. And I'm thinking about our aged, and like Eddie said, working with the a consortia of other organisations. I remember that many years ago about why we have lots of older Australians from multicultural communities are wanting to age with some dignity in a space and in a community that is right for them, in a setting that is right for them. And I know that from my own family and my own loved ones, including loved ones that come from multicultural communities, how important it is to have that dignity afforded to you in your later life after particularly committing so much to the Australian community. And I'm very grateful that there's a really strong aged care, multicultural aged care community here in Victoria. So that was some of my experiences with FECA that I wanted to share, and thank you for reminding me of that, Eddie. I appreciate that so very much. That has stayed with me all these years later, and I still think about my commitment to continuing to work with multicultural communities and the nexus between, multicultural communities and First Nations people. And yes, the connection between Victorian state organisations like VATCHO and ECCV is remarkably strong. I'm also ex-VATCHO, so, I'll just put that out there as well, that I knew from my work there just how strong the advocacy is when it comes from both ECCV and VATCHO together. So can I say, it's great to hear that that's still going and still going strong. I've spent the last 6 months since I've been in this role, not only learning the ropes and understanding, but also introducing myself to the multicultural communities here in the northern suburbs, and I've had a real privilege to have some great experiences, including some, what did I say here, Iranian New Year. That was a real highlight, and I was there with Chris celebrating that occasion, and I remember that fondly, sharing stories about my connections to the Iranian community, and they thought that was a little odd and completely unexpected, that a person from Aboriginal background would have such a strong connection to the Iranian community. And the fact is, as I said on that night, I celebrate Iranian New Year every year with friends of mine that are Nauruz, that are very, very special to me. And so, Iranian New Year is just one example. There has been iftar dinners. I've gotten into some great iftar dinners this year, and I just want to thank the Islamic Council of Victoria and the Intercultural Society and others that have really extended that opportunity to me to be welcomed into someone's home and to celebrate iftar dinners, and also some, Thai Pongal events, some community events with the African women. I've done so very many of them, and I just truly love any opportunity to continue to build my publicly demonstrate actually my commitment to building the connections between First Nations communities and multicultural communities. Chris says also the Greek flag raising at Federation Square. Yes, Chris, that's right. That was a very big occasion, 200 years. Was it bicentennial for the Greek community, and I was really pleased to do so very much to celebrate the big occasion for the Greek community. I must confess I didn't get involved in the dancing, and that's probably for the best. The of course, we're here for Reconciliation Week, and not to hear me talk about my great affection for the multicultural community and how you have maintained your strength and cultural celebrations in what has been a remarkably challenging time. We're coming to the end of Reconciliation Week. It's an important to reflect on its meaning, especially in this. It's a milestone year. For those of you that need to know a little bit more about it, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Reconciliation Week, its significance. The Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation launched Australia's first National Reconciliation Week in 1996, and this year marks the 20th anniversary of Reconciliation Australia, and that's the national body. And of course, I think we'll be joined by the representatives of the Victorian body, Reconciliation Victoria, later on. I'm hoping they're on the line. If you are, say hi, as the standalone body tasked with leading the nation's journey towards reconciliation. In that same year, 20 years ago, 300,000 people walked across Sydney Harbour Bridge as part of National Reconciliation Week, and subsequently across bridges in cities and towns to show their support for reconciliation. Now, National Reconciliation Week is celebrated right across Australia, providing a prompt for all Australians to engage in the process of reconciliation. And today is a very significant day. It marks the 29th anniversary of the delivery of the Mabo decision by the High Court. This is, of course, the culmination of decades of activism by Eddie Koika Mabo, and can I honour and pay my respects to the Mer people and his family. And they challenged the legal fiction of terra nullius, which is that, this land was empty and no one was here, back when these big boats arrived, and it led to the legal recognition of the rights and connections of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to land, paving the way for native title. This year's Reconciliation Week, as we heard, is more than a word. It takes action. So, I'm going to stop and say this is the sort of action that they were calling for, meaningful conversation and dialogue around Reconciliation Week. But we know from the barometer, which is done by Reconciliation Australia, that support has never been higher for reconciliation in our community. It's more than raising awareness and knowledge. I think the days of I've done a morning tea and wipe my hands of it until next year are well and truly over. The call now is for much more meaningful action and activity to be taken. And so I really say that actions like having consortial relationships and making sure that Aboriginal organisations are at the table where decisions are made, and your role as, a state peak is incredibly important, and you've been doing that for just so very many years, and I applaud you endlessly for that. So thank you. It takes bravery to be a champion for reconciliation. It shouldn't, but it does in our community because we know what lives out there. History tells us that if we want to move towards a more equitable and reconciled Australia, we need to take actions, meaningful actions that create a strengthened relationship between communities, and that value the history, culture and future of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I've been marking this National Reconciliation Week for my entire sort of adult life, and the truth is that we know that reconciliation is one step in seeking to meet our objectives for an advancement of our ambition as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, such like closing the gap, having dignity in retirement, being educated at a level equal to our fellow Australians, and maybe some really bold things like not dying 12 years younger on average than every other Australian. So that's why Reconciliation Week is just so very important, and we all have a role to play, not only as organisations and peak bodies like ECCV, but as individuals, as families, as communities, and of course as a nation. So later today you'll be talking, I believe, with Reconciliation Victoria. They really are the leaders in this space, and I applaud your efforts, but I wanted to touch on the definition of meaningful reconciliation. Like I said, it is more than a morning tea, and some of the key actions currently being undertaken by the state government to advance reconciliation in our state. Reconciliation contains 5 integral, interconnected dimensions. That sounds like something out of the space age, but bear with me. One is that we need to overcome racism, and we need to have greater understanding of race relations in our state. We need to achieve equity and equality in justice, health, education, and employment. We need to ensure the institutional integrity of those organisations that govern and support our daily lives, like police, the justice system, health providers, and others. We also need to, I think, grow a statewide identity around how it is that Victoria places and honours our relationship with First Nations Victorians. And of course, we need to address the historical wrongs and injustices that have faced First Peoples. So I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone here that racism and discrimination of any form is completely unacceptable and has no place in our state. As you may know, this government is taking action on racism. I should say that more boldly and more proudly, because the truth is we are taking action on racism and undergoing the development of a new statewide anti-racism strategy that will proactively prevent and address race and faith-based discrimination in Victoria. This strategy is well informed, and actually it's not been done yet. We hope that it will reflect the needs of communities, and the Minister for Multicultural Affairs and the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs have established a task force, the Anti-Racism Task Force, to guide its development. And I was really pleased to see that it will be composed of people with lived experience of racism, of experience working with affected communities. And this task force is crucial in creating a comprehensive strategy focusing on empowering culturally and linguistically diverse communities and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and changing attitudes and enabling long, sustained, meaningful change in our state. Our nation sits at its very heart with a racist constitution. And so unveiling that in all the ways that we need to do that does take it takes an effort. And so 1967, a few years before I was born, we had a great celebration in our country. That was the year that we took a vote to the Australian people to change the constitution such that Aboriginal people could be counted, right? And more than 50 years on, we're after a little bit more than being counted. And that's why, structural reform is so needed to make sure that the voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is given greater say and authority over the decisions that impact them. Structural reform is the sort of outcomes that we want from reconciliation efforts. It means making real change to the way decisions are made and by who, and rather than simply tinkering and existing processes of decision-making and control. As you may know, First Nations people comprise of 3% of the Australian population. It's not even that high in our state. So it means it's difficult for First Nations voices to be heard in elections and in Parliament and by people with power. And so that's why First Nations people have had little say over the laws that impact them and their rights. I'm hoping that by being there and being in there being Parliament, I can go some way to influencing that. But the problem really exists at a national level because the Commonwealth has lawmaking power based on race, right? This so-called racist power is in the Constitution and has never been directed to really any other group except for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It could, in fact, be used to apply for other races, but in fact is there off the back of, well, you know, the foundations of our country. But it means that these special powers have been used to pass many laws on Indigenous matters, from land rights to cultural heritage laws, except sometimes they're not used for such good things as protecting and defending the cultural heritage of First Nations people. And so in ignoring First People's rights here in our country to self-determine, as outlined by United Nations, we have got some work to do. And that's why the Uluru Statement sought to address that. And so it's so very, very powerful. And I would encourage you all to take the time to read the Uluru Statement. The Uluru Statement came about because of efforts after 1967, when you changed the Constitution to say we'll count Aboriginal people. Fast forward 50 years and we want to be heard, and we want our history to be heard. And so that's why I'll just say, if there's anything that you can take away from today, I will say to take some time to equip yourself with some knowledge around the Uluru Statement from the heart. It's so powerful. It's so powerful, in fact, that it was acknowledged as the winner this week of the Sydney Peace Prize. It's the first time that the Uluru Statement has enjoyed such an honour, and I know that they'll be looking to mark and honour that later this year. But it's a great honour and long overdue recognition of the power of our resistance, the strength of our resilience, and the ambitions that we collectively hold as Indigenous people for future generations. So in the Uluru Statement, there are 3 tenets to it, and I'll talk about that for a little bit. The first is calling for a voice to Parliament. The second is the Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making and truth telling. These form the 3 main asks of the Uluru Statement. You may have heard it, voice, treaty and truth. So the first one is really to enshrine a First Nations voice to the Parliament in the Australian Constitution. And so in that Constitution, we know that this is done in other parts of the world, and it's just so necessary to make sure that the unique rights that First Nations people have are heard by our Parliament. That debate is currently ongoing about the development of that voice. You'll know that it's been going on for about 10 years. But that was the first one. And the second ask is, of course, a Makarrata Commission, which is to supervise the process of agreement making between governments and First Nations, sometimes referred to as a treaty. And the third is a process of truth telling. So while we wait patiently for the federal government to listen to the calls made out in the Uluru Statement from the heart, we can't really wait any longer, and the impatience of the Victorian Aboriginal community is quite strong because we've been calling for this for such a very, very long time. And so that's why the government has agreed to, embark on its own steps to truth telling and treaty. So here in Victoria, we're really fortunate that we are moving ahead Like many things, sometimes you just can't wait for the feds to pick their socks up, and we just need to get on with it here in our great state. So generations of advocacy, including those that have now been led by the First Peoples Assembly, as well as leadership by our elders and our ancestors, have called upon us to speak truth, which has led to the establishment of the recent Uruk Commission. So this Uruk Justice Commission will investigate the historical and ongoing injustices committed against Aboriginal Victorians since colonisation by the state and non-state entities across all areas of our social, political and economic life. So just this is really a really significant piece of work. This commission will hold the same powers as a Royal Commission to really investigate the story of our nation, our state rather. And recently the commissioners were announced, and I'll just name them for you. They'll be led by Professor Eleanor Burke, who is the chair, and commissioners Dr. Wayne Atkinson, Professor the Honourable Kevin Bell, QC, Sue Ann Hunter and Distinguished Professor Maggie Walter. 4 of these commissioners are Aboriginal, which is really marvellous. And I think it's helpful to have Aboriginal people at the heart of this work if we're indeed to have a process in which Aboriginal people will feel that they're going to be valued and heard. 2 are elders, quite esteemed elders, very respected in our community, and 2 are traditional owners here in our state. They hold extraordinary knowledge in law, systemic disadvantage, healing trauma and land rights. So they're just getting started with their work. So keep an eye out for that. That's the Uruk Justice Commission. And of course, we hope that we'll be hearing the stories about impacted First Peoples across generations, whether that's the stolen generations or even to look at the injustices experienced today. There's so much that we can do with that commission, and we've got to get that truth out here today. Like I said earlier, our elders have libraries worth of knowledge and stories that need to be heard and need to be captured, and I'm hoping that this commission also provides an opportunity for that. Secondly, when we're talking about the second ask of the Uluru Statement was around treaty, and for those of you that may not be aware, Victoria's embarked on a treaty process now for a few years because, well, we just want to get on with it. And so the work of treaty is continuing, and importantly so. The view is from the leadership in our community is that you can't have a treaty without first speaking truth, and so that's why this Uruk Justice Commission is just so very important, and so that's where we're up to in the state. So that's 2 really big things. Treaty is progressing. We do have the First Nations Assembly here in Victoria, as well as the 5 commissioners that have had to, recently been appointed. I know that they're very keen to get out to communities and make sure that that their work begins. And I commend them and wish them all the very best with their work. It brings me back to reconciliation and what it is that we must do or think about. And when I say we, I actually think the broader Victorian community. We must continue on our path as allies and friends of First Nations Victorians, and a very public way to do that is by committing to a reconciliation action plan. It outlines your commitments and actions that you'll take as an organisation to advance reconciliation. And I really do applaud ECCV on embarking on this journey. Of course, I know that in that you'll discover and hopefully grow the connection that ECCV has with and your various member organisations with First Nations communities, our connections, our joint connections to land, home, heritage, the importance of family, and also language is something that I think is shared, the importance of maintenance and restoration and continuation of language, I know will come out pretty strongly. I do wish you all the very best on your journey to creating your first reconciliation action plan, and look forward to, following your process. I do hope you'll keep me up to date and see how we can promote and support and strengthen the relationship between First Nations Victorians and multicultural communities. I, of course, am a new MP. I think I'm like 8 months in, maybe, here in Melbourne's North. As anyone would know, it's a very strongly multicultural community. It's also a very strong community with our First Nations community. And I will, through my work, I hope to continue to be a connector of the two and continue to publicly demonstrate my commitment to multicultural communities. So you'll see me out and about at things. Please don't hesitate to come and say hello. And my commitment goes beyond, beyond these pandemics and these tough times. I hope to be out, celebrating the richness, culture and diversity of our multicultural communities. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you so much, Chris, for the invitation. That's me. So Uluru Statement, please get behind it, have a read, and also all the very, very best with your work in advancing your reconciliation journey. I'm happy to take any questions if and that's me, Eddie. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheena. Look, I just say I omitted to mention you are the first Aboriginal woman to represent to become a member of Parliament, to represent the government, the ALP, and by the sound of it, you've hit the ground running, and your background, which I didn't mention all of it before, has given you a wonderful grounding in relation to taking up the issues. So if there are one question I'd put where you were running short of time is, how are you being respected within the parliamentary scene across parties, across the diverse parties? Are you being received well, constructively?
That's a really good question. Thanks, Eddie. We start every parliamentary day with the Lord's Prayer. And then following that, we do an acknowledgement of country. In my view, perhaps that's not the right order, but but what happens is I start every parliamentary day and everybody generally stands up for the acknowledgement of country, as they do for the Lord's Prayer. We do have a member of the Legislative Council that refuses to stand up every time the acknowledgement of country is done. So every parliamentary day, I start my day with someone disrespecting my culture and custom, heritage and protocol. And yes, he's outrageous Bernie Finn and he makes me wild. But to start every day with that sort of attack on your culture and your practice is incredibly it just gets to me, I've got to say. So apart from him, I would say that so many others have been very, very good and very, supportive. I think it's only the multicultural members of the Parliament that understand about the cultural load that you carry. So I'm not only there as the member for the Northern Metropolitan Region, I also have my community come to me on all sorts of issues from all over the state. And so I just would say that the solidarity and friendship that's been extended to me through members from multicultural backgrounds has been remarkably strong, and I just want to sort of acknowledge that, and that only they understand what it is to also support your community as well as do your job.
All right.
Thanks,
Look, with the wrap planned, there'll be some discussion about that later in the meeting. Is there any pressing questions? Because we're running short of time. Chris, do you want to outline the workshop process?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Sheena, for making time today to come and visit us and speak with us. I'm sure everyone would agree, and I can see from the comments that people have really sort of valued it. So really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And obviously looking forward to working with you and your colleagues within Parliament going forward to advance this agenda.
Thank you. I'll pop off now if that's all right, Chris. I've got some to attend to. Thank you.
And put your hand up in appreciation of Sheena's contribution.
Oh, thank you, everyone. Truly, thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks, Sheena. We look forward to working with you.